When you're in a place that's peaceful, it's clean, it has great fragrances, these things are very uplifting to the spirit.
I like to look at green as infrastructure. Just like we have pipes carrying our water and we have roadways carrying our cars, everyone should be in walking distance of a park.
I think the thing that's going to define Detroit this next 50, 100 years is the flip side of what defined us for the last 100 years. We have the potential to be that place, that catalyst place again, where we figure out how to reuse the space, how to reuse these buildings.
You can use greenways and open space to generate some economic development and some community spirit. There's a whole range of things you can do, and they all have economic benefits that become apparent pretty soon.
This is the perfect time to be investing. Open green space, maintain green space. These are things that really help bolster not only economic vitality, but emotional and physical vitality as well.
There's no other city in the 20th century that had a greater impact on the world than Detroit.
Detroit started as a French settlement along the river linking Lake Huron and Lake Erie. By the mid-1800s, the city had established itself as a manufacturing hub, leading industries like shipbuilding, rail car manufacturing, and stove making.
We had a huge industrial waterfront. Detroit was about making and an industry, and industry kind of dominated the architecture. There's this rim around the downtown area. Industry developed around these rail lines so they would have access, and then the neighborhoods were built around this industrial development.
With this growth, Detroit needed more space to meet civic and commercial needs. At the end of the 19th century, Detroit annexed many of the neighboring towns and villages to reach its current size, 140 square miles.
And then around 1900, when the automobile came along, this place, for a lot of reasons, coalesced as the capital of the automobile industry. We attracted hundreds and hundreds of thousands of immigrants from the American South as well as from overseas. And so we went from 300,000 people in 1900 to just shy of 2 million people in 1950. So we were the place to be if you were a factory worker who wanted good pay and good benefits and your own home.
People were making enough money to buy a square lot with a house and a garage. And so that's how the city kind of developed. And so we don't have the densities that maybe a New York or Chicago has.
After a century of industrial expansion, Detroit had ushered hundreds of thousands of factory workers into the comfort of a middle-class life.
The 50s was really the pinnacle point for the city of Detroit. A city essentially built around one industry. When that one industry collapsed or declined and left, we really didn't have anything else to rest on.
What's happened is not so much of a natural disaster, but an economic disaster.
Over time, the modest homes and factories of urban Detroit no longer sufficed. The newest housing and most modern amenities were outside city limits, but conveniently connected by the freeway system.
We allowed our population to disperse without much thought. We allowed factories to move out from our inner core.
We really had kind of a disposable urban form. You'd build it, you'd use it for 50 or 75 years, and then you'd throw it away. Starting with things like the Packard plant, built around 1900 as the most modern factory in the world, closed in the late 50s when it was obsolete.
When they were designed and these behemoths were built, they weren't built in a way that could be adapted for new technologies. And instead of spending all the money to retrofit it, it's much easier to move a factory out into like a green space and start from scratch. Even though we've put together every tax credit, every economic development tool possible, they're not reusing the buildings.
When the auto-related industries began to leave city limits, Detroit started to lose jobs at a quickening pace. Detroit's population began a steady decline from its peak of almost 2 million in 1950.
Population loss tends to have a very fast negative impact on an area. You start with a church that has maybe 1,000 families, and then it goes down to 300, and the church can't stay open, so you lose an anchor. The same happens with schools. Your enrollment goes down, and so the school is no longer viable, and that closes, and you've lost a big anchor there. There's no longer a population to support retail stores, and so you lose shopping. They all make the city less desirable to live in, and so more people move out, and that continues the downward spiral.
We were somewhat of a canary in the coal mine at the national level prior to the 2008 recession. By the time that recession came along, we already were hurting. We were losing people, jobs, businesses were shutting down.
A long, very dispiriting decline in the city became an absolute catastrophe. The number of foreclosures in the city is estimated at 60,000. So 1 in 5 housing units in Detroit fell into foreclosure. We're not sure if they left, if they moved in with relatives, but there were a lot of homes abandoned. Blight tends to spread. Blight tends to infect other homes nearby and then the whole block. And you can very quickly lose a whole street.
The life cycle of an abandoned home is one of rapid deterioration. They are first stripped for raw materials. Soon, squatters move in. They become dumping sites, and the house decays. What's left is a crumbling skeleton, or as people try to cook or stay warm, there is a fire, and the home is burned.
What the city's been doing is trying to demolish a lot of these vacant homes, and so you have a lot of open space.
The estimate is we have roughly 40 square miles of vacant properties and abandoned properties. Detroit's not homogeneous, so some neighborhoods have stayed really intact. Other neighborhoods have seen more vacancy, more abandonment. Some parts of the city have become urban prairie.
Having all this land that's no longer active reduces our tax base because industrial users generate tax dollars and they employ a lot of people, and the people who are here pay their own taxes, they buy goods and services. It's been a really hard drain on the financial viability of the city government.
And now it becomes an issue of how to deal with all this space that we have to manage. We can't provide the level of services that people deserve over this large expanse of space.
911 calls don't get answered as quickly, streetlights don't get fixed as quickly, potholes don't get filled as quickly. The city becomes less clean, less pretty, less safe.
When you're surrounded by that for 40, 50 years, you could see how it's easy for some folks to start saying, we can never overcome this. But when we show people in Detroit that it is possible, all of a sudden you're seeing motivated, engaged citizens again and doing tremendous things.
Addressing the root of Detroit's economic decline is critical to redevelopment efforts.
We have somewhere around 40 square miles of vacant land. That's close to a third of the city. Most people think of this as a disaster and a calamity, but of course it also provides the opportunity to do something really new and different and big.
Repurposing vacant and abandoned land will create a stable market for growth in the city's economy and improve the quality of life for residents.
How can we take that open space and make it productive? How can we produce educational opportunities and research opportunities? How can we produce innovative stormwater management opportunities? How can we produce energy? How can we produce art and culture? All within this concept of the productive landscape in this neighborhood.
Strategic deconstruction will target buildings damaged beyond repair while preserving historic architecture and landmarks.
We're just looking for pockets of the city that we can create as anchors and really be the seed bed for new growth.
We can begin to use industrial spaces to create new industry. Before, our industry was cars. Now our industry can be food. Now our industry can be trees. Now our industry can be energy.
We've been able to look at some of the abandonment maps and seen where city-owned properties are and figure out if we could build greenways on some of those abandoned properties. We have this opportunity to turn these abandoned properties into green spaces. It's an interesting idea that I'm not sure has been applied elsewhere.
Already underway, the Inner Circle Greenway and related greenway projects are connecting Detroit's neighborhoods and encouraging local business. Activating the former industrial and railroad corridors, Detroit's greenway system will create high-identity gateways with parks, plazas, and future public transportation options.
If we were successful getting the Inner Circle Greenway completed, I think we're going to see a lot more people using it for transportation. We're going to see improved property values along the way. We're going to see people want to live near the trail, businesses wanting to locate along the trail, people getting outside more, leading healthier lifestyles. It would have just a huge positive effect on the community.
I think it's an economic development strategy, is creating those type of places that people want to be in. People place a greater premium now in their lives in being in communities that have these amenities.
High-profile projects that reactivate historic properties will revitalize their surroundings and provide a public legacy for the next chapter in Detroit's history.
When we do clean up these spaces, it lets the marketplace kick in and draw investment.
Indirectly, what it's doing is it's making all these properties around it more developable, which is very important because developing an abandoned building is also very difficult. There's a great cost associated with that. Green space and hopefully help encourage the development of buildings on the park.
I think the ideal thing is to see where other people's investments are and make the connection. Your investment in a trail connects up to a facility that someone else is investing in, and making all those connections so that the investments all leverage each other. I think that's really, really valuable.
This is the perfect time to be investing in green space. Open green space, maintained green space, access to nature. These are things that offset some of the symptoms and side effects of the economic decline.
I have a lot of hope for these kinds of greenfield interventions. All these things make the city a better place to live, and so this downward spiral of blight leading to more blight becomes an upward spiral because improvements lead to more improvements.
Nobody wants to hang out in a parking lot. I mean, there's a natural inclination to be in some place that's aesthetically pleasing. Once those places get a critical mass of people coming, it's only natural for people to start looking at the buildings around there and being like, why is that building boarded up? Why isn't there a coffee shop here?
When people feel good about their place, they invest in their place. They reach out to others and help the broader community. These kind of activities are attractive at any number of levels. It's like an underlying momentum.
I think Detroit's been ready for a project like this. The people of Detroit are very resilient, and Detroit's always been about making things. The way we're kind of looking at this project, what this can do is provide Detroit an opportunity to remake itself.